President of Binghamton University College Republicans. I'd like to welcome all of you to the great debate, the political crossover of the semester, I hope. Most of the work for this event tonight was done in the past week because we only received approval for the space in the past week, so I appreciate each and every person who has come here, each and every debater who has come to debate, and each and every organization who has come here despite us coming like the day before or something requesting that you show up, so I'm really, really happy about that. Speaking of which, I just want to give some thanks to some people. First of all, obviously the members of all the three main organizations debating tonight, the members of College Democrats, College Libertarians, and last but not least, the members of my own club, College Republicans. Thank you for all of your willingness to work together. That's kind of hard to find nowadays, especially on a college campus. The past few years have been pretty difficult, with a lot of controversy, misconceptions about each other. It's been, and obviously COVID, of course. It's been a really difficult time for everybody, so I appreciate everyone who's just here tonight. Thank you for College Dems for splitting the cost of this debate. We'll have pizza later at intermission around 8, so there will be food to eat. Thank you for all of our debaters, including from College Democrats, Celia Holden, Ryan Gare, Tim Martinson, and Chance Fiorifi.
Yes, excellent.
Yeah.
Yes.
From College Libertarians, Ed Dezalia, Shane O'Loughlin.
Lachlan, close.
Lachlan. And Sid Gundaparnini. And from College Republicans, Logan Blakesley and Arthur O'Sullivan. Thank you to all of you for showing up tonight, being insane enough to even bother engaging with politics, as despite, and I'm pretty sure we'll hit our statistics on this later, despite record voter engagement from the 2020 election with young people, very few young people actually voted in the last election and are still not really voting now. So again, thank you for all engaging in politics, and all of the debaters for being brave enough to reach out to the other side, have discussions. I don't think that there's any winners in this debate. I think just coming here, being sane enough to hear each other out, hear an opposing view to your own is winning enough. So with all of that, I'd like to give the podium to Logan Blakesley. He's the one who came up with the idea for this entire event for all of us to come to tonight. So if you can give a round of applause to him, and he'll come together.
Thank you, everyone. On behalf of College Republicans, I would like to thank my opponents for helping share the value of civic engagement to Binghamton University. As it stands currently, voters under the age of 30 have only accounted for 5.4% of early ballots cast in the upcoming 2022 midterm election. This must change. If young Americans want to say in our democracy, we must encourage our friends and family to vote. I hope this debate will help you decide who you want to represent you and enact policies that you support. With that said, I should say that College Republicans stands for three things. We stand for limited government, we stand for the Constitution, and we stand for free enterprise in the United States. These values have been our guiding principles for arguably over a century at this point. And with that in mind, we hope to continue supporting those values in the upcoming midterm election. We believe that our candidates that we have fielded on the ballot in New York and across the country support those values as well. And generally speaking, spread awareness if you can. Make sure that on social media, that by word of mouth, all of you vote for who you believe in. Spread the word and make sure that others vote for who they believe in, because this election, many of the margins are quite close right now, and we cannot afford people sitting out when that could turn the tide. So, thank you so much for coming tonight. It really has been an honor, and I can't wait to see what becomes of this tonight.
So, my name is Joe Schatz. I'm the Director of Debate here at Binghamton University. They came here to ask me to moderate the debate, And so that way we can make sure that everyone has a even amount of speaking time and the ability to sort of get their points across. I really think it's great that we have such a turnout to this event because it shows that not only do we have clubs that are willing to engage in politics, but we have a student population who wants to hear about that and figure out a way where we can engage in dialogue so that way we can move forward together. It is important that everyone has the ability to sort of communicate with one another in an effective way so that way we can create a better political community that can really represent everybody, even if you happen to lose in an election cycle, that you know that the channels of elections and the education system is there so that way we continuously shape the political world and the communities that we live in. There are some ground rules for the debate that I will initially cover. The first is that we ask the audience remain silent during the debate. After somebody finishes their speech, you can obviously, clap for them, but let's not boo people or anything, disparaging to our speakers in that regards, and let's not interrupt them while they're speaking. We have time for about 10 minutes of questions at the end of the debate where we will take open questions from the audience that can be fielded to any participant. But before then, we had each of the groups submit questions ahead of time that were sort of randomly selected that they've all agreed upon from that bank of questions. Each group will have the ability to answer the question for 3 minutes, and then there'll be an open conversation where the different teams can be able to ask questions to each other and answer. All those individual speeches should be limited to no more than 60 seconds because we hope to get through a little bit of the conversation before we move on to our next topic. All right? Is there any questions about the format from any of our participants? Yes?
Hey Joe, can the rest of the presidents also introduce themselves as well?
Sounds great. All right, so then let's going down. Let's go to the libertarians to introduce themselves.
Hey everybody, so my name is Shane O'Loughlin. I'm a linguistics major here, and this is the thing that I've been spending a lot of my time doing this semester, which has been trying to bring back a club that has been kind of dead for a little while. And so I really want to try to create a sort of community of people who understand the values that the libertarians strive for. I'll have Sid actually give the rest of the speech because he has some things he wants to say about this.
I just want to say, in a time when both parties were happy to spend $2 trillion on economic stimulus, and both of them sat idly by as the Federal Reserve printed trillions of dollars, as the Federal Reserve subsidized America's largest corporations, buying hundreds of billions of dollars in buying the corporate bonds of America's largest ultra-wealthy corporations, both of these parties sat idly by. And now Americans are living paycheck to paycheck at higher rates than ever. People cannot buy food by the margin, and people are silent. Democrats and Republicans, they said, it just happened. They're blaming it on everything else. They're blaming it on Ukraine. They're blaming it on supply shops, everything but themselves. They refuse to take blame. These are the same two parties that have lied to you for years about drug policy. President Biden recently claimed that he was releasing people from federal prison by expunging crimes. Not one person was released from federal prison under his recent executive order. Both parties have succumbed to corporate welfare of special interests, Democrats to unions and energy subsidies to ExxonMobil and all these corporations that you call evil, yet they keep giving money to them. The Republicans keep dumping money to the NRA, and there is silence. Both parties have claimed to be pro-immigration. The Republicans haven't had a pro-immigration stance since the 1980s, and the Democrats, that's a lie. None of us were alive in this room. If you want to vote for the Democrats, you are voting to take your own rights away. If you want to vote for the Republicans, you are voting to take your own rights away. And you may not believe in voting for libertarians, and if you don't, that's fine, but fight like hell for your politicians to embrace libertarian ideals, to embrace liberty, to embrace freedom, embrace free markets, and let people live. Thank you.
Guys, I'm going to stand because I'm sick and coming out of a cold, so I got to project myself. Are we excited? Right? Guys, come on. Hey guys, a little bit of myself. I'm Chance. I'm the president of college dance here on Binghamton University's campus. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do on campus first. We get directly involved with candidates across the local area and the federal level. We work directly with Josh Wiley. We work directly with Leah Webb, and even a Hope's team event at some points. But we work to really strive to get Democrats elected on campus. So we offer internships, we offer volunteer work, a lot of the same stuff you hear every election cycle. So the Democratic Party, at least in our view, we represent the strengthening of democracy here on campus. We want to ensure that candidates get elected who actually want to preserve and protect democracy, who wants to preserve and protect the Constitution in every way, shape, and form. Another thing is that we are the party of the working class. You are right, people live paycheck to paycheck. I live paycheck to paycheck, so do my parents. But the thing is that we're strengthening and making sure that people don't have to live like that anymore with Democrats in office. So I hope you guys loved tonight's debate. It was a great honor to get this place up and running. We're in Bullitt Union Hall. Of all places, this is a great place to meet and have a debate. So thank you guys so much for being here. It's an honor, and let's get this thing started.
I'd just like to say one more thing. I just had the pleasure of meeting the possible future Speaker of the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, and he wanted me to tell you all good luck and thank you for participating in democracy. So we can start.
So while our speakers are speaking, Rain will give you a hand signal showing you that you have 1 minute left in your opening statement, and then we'll go like this for when you have time, so that way you have some marker to keep track of. We are going to start the debate on the topic of gun control. We will let the college Republicans answer this question first, and then we will go to the Libertarians and the Democrats, and the next time we will do it in reverse. So the first question is, in June of 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a nearly century-old New York law that limited concealed carry permits to individuals who demonstrated a need for a firearm beyond self-defense. Our question is, how absolute are federal Second Amendment rights compared to state laws? So college Republicans, you're up first, 3 minutes.
Thank you. To begin with, it goes without saying that I believe that the Supreme Court made the right decision when they struck down that law. The current precedent with the Constitution states that state laws cannot override federal laws, and as it stands, the current text within the Second Amendment says the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. I believe that the New York state law that was overruled was very clearly an infringement because it stated that New Yorkers that want to have a concealed carry license must demonstrate a need to own a gun beyond self-defense. I think that is absurd. I think it harms public safety. I think in general it harms many people who want to simply have the right to own a gun. Without going into the subject of how this might relate into criminal activity, I do believe that the fundamental right of all Americans is to own a firearm, and especially for self-defense. I don't think anyone needs a reason beyond self-defense to own a gun. I don't think people should have to go above and beyond to assert their rights before the state. So I do agree with the Supreme Court decision, and I believe that Second Amendment rights are absolute in the face of state laws. Thank you.
Libertarians, up to 3 minutes.
Well, I think that for this question, the question really should be to what extent can state laws, if you will, try and forward the constitutional, the Second Amendment. I think that the question should really be to what extent can state laws infringe on any right. Now, people might claim that there might be some interest that the state has in regulating firearms. I would disagree, but some may claim that. However, if we allow states in this regard to overrule the Second Amendment because they claim they have this interest, there is nothing stopping other states from infringing upon the other Bill of Rights. Texas could claim tomorrow if they wanted to that they had an interest in overruling the First Amendment by pursuing some potentially theocratic policy. But if we accept that the state has some ability for its laws to try and overrule the Second Amendment, that would also be within its purview. I think we should recognize that all of these would be gross violations of not only our inherent rights, but also of the constitutional institutions that make up this country and its foundational values.
And then college Democrats.
Folks, the Supreme Supreme Court, in the case that they're talking about, is New York State Rifle Pistol Association versus Bruin, I believe. And I'm not sure if you guys know this, but New York argued in that case actually that the right to carry a weapon for self-defense outside of the home is not absolute. I'm not going to argue whether or not the Supreme Court made a right decision in striking that down, because that wouldn't really change anything. But I want to bring up a really interesting point, and that is, with this case coming out, the precedent not being set up is that guns being regulated are going to continue to evolve. We are not using muskets, as most of you know. A lot of people who do all these violent acts are using handguns, semi-automatic rifles, or in some cases even automatic rifles. The issue is not the fact that the right is absolute. The issue is that we're not focusing on the real concern, which is that weapons are evolving, but the regulations are not evolving. The thing is that this case is essentially allowing for the regulations to stay consistent, which I don't believe that would be right. I think most of us would think that would not be okay. But and you mentioned infringement because guns have changed. The laws are infringing on those rights, are creeping on those rights, and are starting to restrict them because weapons have changed and the regulations have not.
Would any of the various different groups want to raise a question or to any of the other groups that are here? All right, I saw Republicans hand first.
Hold on, by raise a question, do you mean like respond or?
Respond or ask a targeted question, either way.
In that case, I would simply like to say that, in my personal belief, I think the increased availability of 3D printed guns across the United States kind of demonstrates the ultimate impossibility of full gun control in the near future. Regulations may have to reflect that fairly soon, but I think it goes without saying that pretty soon the topic of gun control will be almost irrelevant because it'll be almost impossible to enforce. I think generally that will be the fulfillment of a personal right, and even if guns have changed, I don't think the ultimate need for self-defense have changed. I don't think that certain types of firearms should be limited simply because they are not equatable to muskets or other single-shot weapons. Guns evolve with the times, and I think that is not necessarily a bad thing. That's simply the progressing of technology.
Jerry, I saw your hand for a point.
Well, I was going to say on a similar note, yes, firearms have evolved and they have changed since the Second Amendment was instituted. However, we have to recognize that all methods of communication have changed significantly as well. Prior to when the First Amendment was instituted, the main way you could communicate an idea was writing it on a piece of paper and handing it out to people, going to a town square and personally speaking. Obviously, in a world where people can communicate across the globe with just a phone that most people own, things have changed. And yet we also recognize that this First Amendment right to free speech has remained the same because inherently it is a right. At the same time, I think that we should recognize that even if firearms have changed, even if what I just said was not the case, there are alternative methods of causing harm, and getting rid of firearms will not change that. It will only help enable people to not be able to protect themselves by taking it out of their hands.
And would Democrats like to respond?
Yeah, a little bit on what you just said. I actually totally agree. In parts of the Constitution, things have not changed, and for the better. Free speech has been respected amongst, everyone. I would agree that everyone thinks that free speech is great. But bearing arms and free speech are two different things entirely. I think that, if we're going to talk about guns, and if we're going to talk about how the right to restricting firearms, how we move beyond that, I think we have to also realize that things are changing, yes, but there's a good point in saying that the Constitution cannot be plainly read as such. The right to bear arms specifically, if you read it as plain as it is, it doesn't mean own a firearm individually. It means to have a militia. It means more than just bearing an individual arm to defend yourself. So there are plenty of reasons why that sort of argument may not be, I guess, credible in a way. But I totally agree with what you're saying about the First Amendment. I absolutely agree.
And we have time enough for each of you to give one final response if they would like. All right, we'll go same order, Republicans, Libertarians, Democrats, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
All right, delving a bit more into the specific text within the Second Amendment and regarding the rights of the people versus the rights of, say, a militia to keep and bear arms, I think it goes within the historical context of the time that the Founding Fathers believed that the American people themselves were the militia, and that to be a well-regulated militia meant to be a well-armed militia as well. So in that form, in case the government were to ever simply be less democratic or less receptive to the will of the people, the militia, and thereby the people, could take matters into their own hands and promptly deal with the situation. And going into more modern times, I think the evolution of gun design has been a significant improvement, increased availability of firearms, helps people protect themselves in their homes because they have a greater technological access.
Libertarians?
Well, I think that if we look at this, I don't believe that it's very possible to claim that there's only a militia right to ownership. The Constitution established that the government had a right to national army. To add an amendment guaranteeing the right to have further armed forces would seemingly be redundant. Additionally, we need to realize that historically it has been the case that the Second Amendment and firearms in general have been allowing people, individuals, to protect their rights from harm and discrimination. And that is why historically many forms of gun control have sought to take firearms out of the hands of the poor and those that are discriminated against.
Great. And then the Democrats for the final word on the topic.
Yeah, so great points, guys. Just wanted to, sorry, I got like mind boggled there for a second, so that's the frat thing coming down. Just wanted to point out a thing that the Republicans mentioned earlier. Yeah, they meant our militia, but they did not account for individuals going into schools. So times are changing, they are absolutely changing. The text shall be adopted in ways that we view in a modern light. I just think that makes more reasonable sense. I know we strayed a little bit off the topic of states over the Supreme Court's decision in the Second Amendment's being absolute, but yeah, that's it for me.
All right, thank you all. Our next topic is going to concern immigration. And so we're going to start with the Democrats answering this question. The DACA policy announced by Barack Obama in 2012 still remains in partial effect today, despite multiple attempts from various courts to limit its power. There are close to 700,000 DACA recipients in the U.S. as of August 2018, according to the USCIS. Should Dreamers be given amnesty or citizenship at this point? So Democrats, you have up to 3 minutes to answer.
Okay, so I believe that absolutely Dreamers should be given amnesty, if not full citizenship, because they have been living here for the vast majority of their lives. Many of them have not committed major crimes, serious crimes. They don't even really know any other country than this one. They have no reason not to be given amnesty when it wasn't even their fault that they were brought over here as children by their parents in a way that was not in line with the laws. And they contribute to taxes. They don't even get any benefits from it, like Medicare, Medicaid, and anything like that. They're just living their lives, the vast majority of them, and they don't even get benefits for in many ways. And that's about it. They're basically Americans in the ultimate name, in my personal opinion.
Libertarians?
I think that when you examine the situation of those recipients of DACA, you need to realize that these people came here as children. They did not choose to break the law. They were brought here by their parents. They had no choice in the matter. I think then that to try to punish them for this violation of the law would not be fair. It would not be just to punish someone who had no choice in the matter. I think that we need to recognize this, and I think a fair solution to this would be granting them some form of amnesty. Now, I'm not entirely sure if offering them immediate citizenship would be fair to those who did go through the arduous process to receive citizenship. However, I do think that there should be some potential easing of that process, understanding the fact, recognizing the fact that they have been residing here for many years. I also think that for those concerned from a perspective of law and order, that by granting these people amnesty, they no longer need to fear deportation. And if that's the case, well, they're much more likely if someone does try to harm them or commit a crime against them to report that to the police, because otherwise, if you're afraid of being deported, no one's going to tell the cops. If they're free to do so, if they're able to do so, that means then they're much less likely to have people being able to harm and aggress against these dreamers, and then in turn harm other people simply because they are not deported.
College Republicans?
Admittedly, I do think there is a significant conflict when it comes to what Americans may value on the subject of the DACA policy and the current population of Dreamers in the United States. I do wish that the numbers from 2018 have been updated, because as of 2022, over 2 million or so illegal immigrants have crossed from the southern border into the US. And because of that, we currently don't know what the population of Dreamers might rise to in the coming years. With that said, I do not believe that amnesty or a pathway to citizenship is the correct solution to the problem. Reason being is that we don't know what kind of impact this may have on the educational system within the US, what kind of impact it might have on welfare. And yes, many of these individuals do contribute to taxes, but we must also consider that the families that come with them, if there is amnesty or citizenship on the table, we'd have to see like massive increases within these systems. And we also have to account for whether or not this may create an incentive for future migration crossings into the US so that their families might receive citizenship down the line. I believe that the correct response would be to pursue a pathway to immigration reform that is more humane in the future, but for now I do not think it is appropriate for Dreamers to receive amnesty or citizenship.
And we'll go back to the Democrats for up to a 1 minute response, if you have it.
Yes, so on the topic of whether it would contribute, whether amnesty, if not even citizenship for Dreamers, would lead to some slippery slope towards their extended families, I think that is not as much of an issue, because in many cases, these are, as we said before, these are people who live most of their lives here. And in that way, most of the people they know are Americans, or are essentially Americans, and they may not, we don't even know how many people they do or don't know abroad. It's a bit of a slippery slope to assume that there would be some sort of crisis that could be left over if they're given amnesty or citizenship.
All right, and the Libertarians, do you have a response?
I will abstain from this.
You'll abstain, okay, so back to the Republicans. Do you have anything to add?
As it stands, although I have stated my position that I do not believe amnesty or citizenship is the correct pathway for Dreamers, I do not believe that they should be at risk for deportation unless they have committed a crime within the US. Reason being, as the Democrats have mentioned, Dreamers, they have lived most of their lives in the United States, and culturally they are most likely very Americanized. Most of their peers will be American as well. For that reason, I do believe that some leniency is deserved, and that is my position at this time.
Any final comments from any of the other groups? Not? Okay, we will move on to our third topic, which concerns education. And we'll start with the Libertarians first, and then go to the College Republicans after that. So for education, recently Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida released the Parental Rights in Education bill, dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill. A bill that prohibits classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in certain grade levels or in a specified manner. Additionally, Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia signed his first executive order banning inherently divisive topics like critical race theory. So my question is, are attempts to restrict discussions about race, sexual orientation, or gender identity in schools appropriate? Libertarians, up to 3 minutes.
You know, Republicans are going to try and regulate things in education. Democrats are going to try and regulate things in education. And at the end of the day, we're going to realize that there's no real way to objectively teach education. There are certain things that are fairly obvious. Math, 2 plus 2 is always going to equal 4. I don't think any Democrat or Republican is going to disagree on that. But when you get into the nitty-gritty, particularly in history, which is a topic where there's a lot of contention over a lot of things still, even though what happened, it's pretty difficult to objectively teach these things. So at the end of the day, we have to give people choices. We have to give people options. We have to allow people to do what's best for themselves. And the way to do that, it's by not forcing every single person to go to a one-size-fits-all public school. And yes, you may say, yes, some people go to private school. The thing is, private school is expensive, and we'll get into that in the next question, why that is and how we can fix that. But at the end of the day, we need to give people options. We need to allow people to go to schools where their parents believe they can get the best education. And if a parent believes that their child is being wronged in their school and that they're not being taught properly, they can send them to another school, and ideally they should be allowed to take their tax dollars elsewhere if they see fit. The issue isn't what's being taught in schools, it's that people don't have other options to change where they go to school when they are not getting taught proper education. And systemically, we are looking at this issue the wrong way. Democrats have looked at this the wrong way. Republicans have looked at this the wrong way. Yes, Glenn Youngkin was banning certain things being taught in public schools, but Glenn Youngkin has also passed numerous school choice reforms, allowing people that disagree with that policy to take their money and go to a private school. He is not forcing people to live under these impositions, these regulations that he is enforcing. Whereas in a lot of Democrat states, unfortunately, you can't see the same thing. When you have regulations on education, you have these very restrictive curriculums decided by large authorities, people don't have options in Democrat states. People aren't able to go to private school, especially poor people. Poor Americans aren't able to have these choices that allow them to get the proper education they deserve. And for that reason, we need to expand choice, we need to expand options, we need to allow people to take their tax dollars elsewhere if they are not receiving the education they deserve.
College Republicans?
All right, so the question was, are attempts to restrict discussion on these subjects in schools, quote, appropriate? The answer is obviously yes, because if you said no, you'd have to then accept the contention that showing child pornography, simulated child pornography to a bunch of second graders, their sex ed education is appropriate. That's obviously not true, so the more meaningful question is, what are the proper restrictions on these subjects? And so perhaps it's right, perhaps we should have some free market educational solution, and certainly school choice would help in that respect. See, the interesting thing about this Don't Say Gay bill is that it's only a small minority, only one section of the bill, as I've read it, contains anything pertaining to what schools should and should not teach. The restriction itself states, quote, that between kindergarten and third grade, there should be no discussion of sexual orientation, for instance, and discussion of sexuality at an age-inappropriate level as defined by state standards is improper. So, of course, that's a little oblique. The law itself came from just some assemblyman watching whips of TikTok videos and then saying, I don't like what I see here. I'm going to do political stuff. So, that's the thing. That's only a small minority of the bill. The rest of the bill pertains to parents having the right to know what happens in their child's education. At least what happens. That school administrators, teachers can't keep secrets from their students, can't keep secrets from the parents of their students as to what's going on, except of course if they believe that there's going to be abuse or some sort of ostracization of the child. If they're gay, they reveal that in school, and then they go home to a Christian fundamentalist household. Still, all these things being considered, you can't deny that parents have the right to know what goes on at their child's school, and that once they know what's going on, they should be allowed to decide at least whether or not their child should go to that school and be given that moral and historical education. Thank you.
College Democrats.
So first I want to go on the record and just state something that my Republican peers may have missed in the bill. The law prohibits all classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity starting at grade levels or in a specified manner, and says that classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate for developmentally appropriate for students. This is an incredibly vague law that could be easily used to limit discussion about people with sexual orientations and gender identity other than heterosexual and cisgender. It will frankly be enforced in a way that only prohibits LGBTQ+ educators from discussing their family status, prohibiting only children of same-sex marriages from discussing their families. That's simply not okay. Now, I want to go on the record and say that both Ron DeSantis and Glenn Youngkin, as well as other political figures with similar situations to theirs, have completely misrepresented their positions and the concepts they're fighting against. For starters, critical race theory is an academic or legal framework that essentially states the claim that systemic racism is a part of American society, that racism is largely a structural issue in America and not just an individual one. Scholars and activists are the people examining this concept about how social, legal, and political structures are shaped and defined by the concept of race in America. It is a concept you will see taught in a law school, perhaps in some undergraduate classes in college. It's not a concept being taught in elementary, middle, or high school. And that is a fact that any elementary school, middle school, or high school teacher will reaffirm. And so when people like Glenn Youngkin pass these orders to ban inherently divisive concepts like critical race theory, they're not trying to ban actual critical race theory from schools. They're aiming to erase discussions of race, and especially discussions about how race in America has massively affected all of our nation's institutions. They seek to avoid the discussions about how people of color, and particularly black people, have been discriminated against so thoroughly during the 400+ years America has been occupied by European and European descendants. And if you don't believe me, just look at the wording of the executive order. Inherently divisive concepts like critical race theory and its progeny instruct students to only view life through the lens of race and presume that students are consciously or unconsciously racist, sexist, or oppressive, and that other students are victims. Later in the order, it is stated, quote, "The superintendent of public instruction shall review all policies within the Department of Education to identify those that promote inherently divisive concepts. Such policies shall be ended." This is intentionally vague wording that will cause school districts to err on the side of limiting discussion about race and racial history in America altogether in order to avoid flouting the governor's policy. Youngkin's order states that being taught that students can be consciously or especially unconsciously racist or sexist, etc., and other students can be the victims of these concepts is somehow wrong. That's not true. That is actually a fact. The institutions that have been placed in America mean that most of us do end up with their own unconscious biases against these people. It doesn't make us bad for having picked up these biases, as long as we fight them. And students absolutely can be the victims. And so we have to teach them not to.
That's 2 minutes.
All right, Libertarians, would you like to give your response first?
I want you all to think of your least favorite politician in the world. Be it a Republican, be it a Democrat, be it whoever it be. Think of your least favorite politician. Now, do you want them telling you what your kid should learn in school? Think about that. Do you want your least favorite Republican to be in charge of what your child is learning in school? Do you want your least favorite Democrat to be telling you what your child is learning, what they can and can't learn? Do you want someone telling you that you're not allowed to learn evolution in school? Do you want someone telling you that you can't learn critical race theory in school? What makes my colleague, my Republican and Democrat colleagues qualified to tell your kids what they should be learning? They're trying to divert your attention from the real issue at hand. They do not want you to have this choice. They are dividing you by forcing you to pick between learn this or learn that, instead of saying learn what is best for you. Take your tax dollars where your parents see best. Don't let yourselves get divided and fight for choice.
That's 60. I think Kim Jong-un is a great politician. What do you mean?
Would you let him take your
Oh,
education?
absolutely.
Like your minute? All right.
Well, we seem to be skirting one of the core questions of the debate, and that is where should the line be in terms of how we discuss sexual orientation in elementary schools and older, and how we discuss, you call critical race theory, or the manner in which we discuss race in America. Should it be taught through the framework of critical race theory or its offspring or its offshoots, as the textbook by Delgado says on the very subject? So even though one might not teach critical race theory or queer theory itself in elementary schools, the philosophies on the subject certainly influence the education which one gives. So I'd like to, in your response, hear where you yourself draw the line as to where and how you would want your kids to learn about these things. Thank you.
All right, Democrats?
Well, for the record, I'm against child pornography. I but I think equating child pornography to discussions about gender identity and sexual orientation is simply a falsehood. Like, when people are advocating against these don't say gay bills, no one is advocating for child pornography. Child pornography has nothing to do with teaching about gender identity or sexual orientation in these schools. When we talk about what line we have to do, we should teach people that it's okay to have these discussions about people who are not heterosexual, who are not cisgender. And that's where I believe the line should be. Obviously, should there be absolutely no restrictions? Should we talk about sex in front of these kindergartners? No, but I don't think anyone's advocating for that. The issue with this bill is limiting what discussion can be had and trying to limit it altogether. And so that would be my response.
We're going to give each group one more time to respond. We'll go that way, so we'll start Republicans, Libertarians, Democrats.
I just wanted 10 seconds to say, I was not saying that Democrats are advocating for child porn. I was just using an ad absurdum. I myself don't like child pornography.
All right, Libertarians, you'd like to add something?
The point is not where you draw the line on what critical race theory is. If you notice, both of them are arguing two different things. What Arthur's saying critical race theory is and what they're saying critical race theories are two completely different things. And this has been the center of every single critical race theory debate. It's not meant to actually have any substance. No one is even agreeing on definitions before arguing. It is divisive. They're not arguing anything of substance. The point is, why should policymakers be deciding this line? We can fight about the line all you want, but why should policymakers be the one deciding who draws this line? They have no qualifications whatsoever to say that this is what should be taught and this is what shouldn't. The fact of the matter is parents know what their kids need best. This decision should be in the hands of parents and no one else.
Democrats like the final word on the topic?
Well, considering most parents and families can't afford private school, and so most of these people have to send their kids to public school, I think it's pretty important that we have guidelines in place for what we do want to teach these kids, and that's why we can't just say, oh, what does it matter? We'll just let the parents choose, because most parents can't afford private school. Critical race theory is not taught in K-12 schools. That is an undisputable fact. Any other take is just simply false. Gay people exist, transgender people exist. We should be able to teach that in schools. We should not have laws limiting so, and honestly, that's all I have to say. All right.
So I'd like to thank our panelists up until this point. We have 3 topics that are coming up after the break, which include a debate on abortion, economic policy, and international relations. We will recess for 10 minutes, so that way people can take some food from over there. We have pizza, and the debaters get prepared. Versus Jackson overruled the previously recognized constitutional right to abortion. What exactly is in the Constitution that you believe permits abortion throughout the United States or leaves it up to the individual 50 states to make the decision after Roe v. Wade?
All right, so how the heck do I work this thing? Oh,
You hold it down.
oh, I hold it down.
If it's
Like this? What the?
give me a second.
What? Hey,
Yeah, you got it.
All right, all right. Now I'm gonna have to hear my, what's that?
I'm dividing up into times.
Ah, thank you. Actually, that was part of my statement. All right, so what exactly is in the Constitution that permits abortion in all 50 states? The answer is, I would argue, nothing. Not only I would argue, Ruth Bader Ginsburg would argue that. Let's see, Lawrence Tribe. I was about to say Lawrence Fishburne. He's a different guy. Lawrence Tribe, very liberal Harvard law professor, says Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided. The trimester framework was pulled basically out of thin air, and ultimately, there was a liberal professor of the at Duke who once said that Roe v. Wade was a perfect legal decision, had everything you could possibly want in a legal decision, except for a word of legal reasoning. Essentially, a group of 9 judges got together and decided that, well, we believe that we can technocratically declare what is and isn't a right based off of to call it a loose reading of the Constitution would be generous. So, essentially they said that contained somehow within the 14th Amendment was this substantive due process that stated that women have the right to privacy that extended over the fetus which they were gestating, and that gave them the right to abort within the range of viability, which wasn't decided by doctors, it was decided again by the judges. So overall, I would say that there's nothing within the Constitution that says that abortion should be permitted across all 50 states at all times, and that one should refer to the 10th Amendment of the Constitution when it says that all rights not enumerated herein shall be, that all rights, they may not have listed every right, but one should leave it to the states to decide on these matters of controversy. And that should be the extent of what the court itself decides. Thank you.
Libertarians?
So the question when we're talking about this is about what in the Constitution says that abortion ought to be decided in any way, and it doesn't say that at all. But we have to remember that the Constitution, at the end of the day, is just a document. It's just a sheet of paper, and the idea that we can, take every single right and put it into a piece of paper, it's faulty. We have these rights, and the right to self-ownership is something that we have as individuals and that we must have ethically. We must. And so when we're looking at this, we have to say, at the end of the day, if I own myself, I own my body. So then the question becomes, okay, well, I own myself, and so I own my property also. If I bring someone over for dinner one night, and then they stay over for 9 months, that doesn't seem to be very fair to me. I should be able to kick them off my property whenever I feel like it. And if my body is owned by myself, then that means that I should be allowed to get rid of the baby. But the problem that we have to have as libertarians is that we also understand the other direction, that when we make these these limits or everything, all these times and the amount of weeks, the amount of months before up until when a baby can get aborted or when it can't, it's all arbitrary, because there's nothing necessarily differentiating the baby from being inside the womb to being outside the womb, and nothing makes it more human when it leaves the womb. So both have their points, but the question that we're asking is, how do we bring these together? How do we come up with a principled compromise? And the answer that I'm going to propose here, and it's a little bit out there maybe to some people, is when we think about abortion, we think about so there's really 2 steps to it. There's the termination of the fetus, and then there's the eviction of the fetus, as in getting the baby out of there. However, libertarians are against termination, particularly against killing. So the answer that libertarians would go for, the libertarian answer, and this is an ethical answer, is that instead we believe that you should be able to evict the baby, but you shouldn't be allowed to kill the baby. And this is an ethical concern, because otherwise, we have blood on our hands, and if we do it the other way, then the woman doesn't own her body. So this is the compromise that we need, and this is the one that the libertarians are going for. This is the one that we're going to represent.
All right, Democrats?
Although I do agree with concerns that the word abortion is not in the Constitution, I would argue and say that the 9th Amendment of the Constitution and the Due Process Clause in the 14th Amendment are what permitted abortion nationwide after the ruling of Roe v. Wade. There are many controversies surrounding the fact that the word abortion is not included in the Constitution, but neither is the right to privacy, the Electoral College, congressional districts, freedom of expression, or women in general. Reason being, not many of these things existed or were debated when the Constitution was first written. Given the vagueness of the Constitution, we don't have the luxury to have most constitutional rights spelled out for us. However, the 9th Amendment covers these unenumerated rights, essentially telling us that the Constitution isn't a be-all, end-all, but an including but not limited to document. The 9th Amendment also states that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So the rights that were not mentioned by the government do not belong to the government, they are still our rights. Furthermore, the Due Process Clause states that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And it can and it will be argued that forced pregnancies infringe upon our natural and constitutional rights. As a woman, I know that no one is excited about getting an abortion, but it's often better than the alternative. And I'm sure that both of my opponents can agree that the government should not be able to make decisions for the people and that we know what is best for ourselves. It is not a blessing not every pregnancy is a blessing and some are misfortunes, and we should have the liberty to make our own decisions regarding it. It is not a blessing for an unwilling and unsupportive mother to be tied to a baby she never wanted, and life will become even worse for the child when they are introduced into life. It is not a blessing for a baby to be introduced into a family that cannot financially support it. It is not a blessing for a young woman just starting her independent life to have to settle down immediately and not be ready for a child. It is not a blessing for a woman to be forced to co-parent with her assaulter and endure years and years of more abuse. Furthermore, it is not a blessing for a woman with a serious medical condition to have to choose an unborn baby over her own life. With abortion outlawed, many will suffer. We cannot trust the government to have a blanket best interest in mind for all citizens. That liberty belongs to the people. Times have changed, and I think that we cannot wait for the Constitution to catch up.
All right, Republicans, would you like a response?
Sure. So, in response to that, I would like to ask, so would you agree then with the Supreme Court declaring the right to a sort of trimester framework of abortion, wherein one can receive an abortion for any reason for the first 2 trimesters and can only have restrictions on the 3rd trimester, given, say, provisions for the health of the mother? And at the same time, I would like to ask, are there any reasonable limitations to when abortion should be allowed before, during, or after birth? And if so, how would you square that with the constitutional right which you've listed to an abortion?
So I would be open. I do agree with the trimester framework, but I think that it should be taken on a case-by-case basis after the 2nd trimester. I think that all people who are childbearing, they should be able to abort their child without any explanation. They have that right to privacy for the first 2 trimesters, but the 3rd trimester, honestly, personally, I do think it's pushing it, but I'm also not going to sit here and make that decision for other people and act like I should be the one in charge of that. And would you mind repeating your second question?
Yes, how do you square that with the constitutionality which you described in your previous response?
Yeah, so I would square that. I mean, the Supreme Court ruling was overturned after all. States do have the opportunities to now make these laws, but I still think that a trimester framework would satisfy the Due Process Clause in the 14th Amendment and the 9th Amendment that these rights do belong to the people. But I think restrictions given in a trimester framework, like after the 2nd trimester, aren't as bad as the ones that are being introduced where it's like 6-week abortion bans. So I think it's pretty constitutional. I personally wouldn't support like just abortions with no reason up to the 3rd trimester, but again, I'm not the one to make that decision for people.
All right, let's libertarians, and I'll go back to the.
Yeah, so once again to reiterate, the rights to yourself do not come from a piece of paper. They are fundamental. We cannot kill the baby ourselves, be evicted. If the baby dies on its own, then so be it. But as tech improves and as time improves, the amount of time that viability for that baby gets younger and younger. So at some point in the future, we could have an incubation process of some sort, and that would be able to help these babies survive on their own if they still have the ability to do so. But here's the thing that you have to understand when you're listening to both these parties, right? Both these parties are arbitrarily setting lines that they believe is correct, or that they believe are correct or incorrect. Both of them are saying, well, in this trimester, yeah, I'm starting to, and this trimester though, what about this trimester, guys? The truth is, and this is a fact, killing is wrong, but restricting property rights is also wrong. The answer is the compromise.
Thank you. Let's go to the Republicans, and then we'll give Democrats another word.
Yes, so I would want to ask then, if I might be more granular with you. You said that, yeah, you believe that you have the constitutional, I'm specifically asking you about this. You said that you have the specific constitutional rights, that the Constitution supports a trimester framework, but I would like specifics on how and how you can sort of philosophically differentiate a baby at the third trimester from one at the second, first trimester, and of course at conception, and also differentiate that whole fetus from a born baby who, all things ceteris paribus, is born into these terrible situations which you've described.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I understood your question from before. I thought you were just asking me about the morality of a trimester framework. I still think that any sort of restrictions should be being made through private decisions. They should not be infringed upon by the state. I think that it should be between a woman and her doctor, whoever's taking care of that pregnancy. I just think the right to privacy is really important, and that's...
Yeah, but you derived it from a constitution. You said that the Constitution doesn't make it explicit, but it's implicit within the Constitution, and I wanted to know at a more granular level how you would square that with the morality of whether the fetus is a child or whether the fetus should be, how you'd separate a fetus from a child, for instance.
I would separate a fetus from a child by simply just saying that it's a fetus until it's born. I think that's science. I don't think there's much more to it. And then I just think that the Constitution and the whole right to privacy thing, the due process clause with life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that's what we should be focusing on. I think that we shouldn't infringe upon anyone's liberty to make their own decisions for their own health.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the economic policy questions. And remember, we'll have some time at the end for people to ask questions to all of our panelists. And so you can return to any of the topics that we've debated in case you want to hear some follow-ups as well. We'll start with the libertarians for this question on economic policy. So the Inflation Reduction Act, passed by the Biden administration to combat record amounts of inflation, will cost the federal government approximately $485 billion. Meanwhile, the Build Back Better Act authorized $1.7 trillion in new spending. My question is, will these initiatives be effective in reducing inflation and helping our economy? So libertarians are up first.
Not only would the Inflation Reduction Act not reduce inflation, it actually still would end up adding to the deficit, unlike what many Democrats claim. And for that reason is the student loan forgiveness that Biden enacted really mitigated all of the deficit reduction brought about by the Inflation Reduction Act. But let's get to the point. The Inflation Reduction Act doesn't reduce inflation. It would worsen inflation. There's numerous parts of the bill that would, particularly the energy subsidies. Build Back Better is filled with corporate welfare for more energy subsidies. Believe it or not, what's up with this? Democrats keep giving into corporate interests. It's a recurring theme, I feel like. But Build Back Better is about, and last I remember, it was in the hundreds of billions of dollars, and somehow people want to say that spending hundreds of billions of dollars that are not collected from taxes, but through created new money, wouldn't be inflationary. And if you kind of dial back 2 years, you remember you were hearing this exact rhetoric when talking about the American Rescue Plan. they said, oh, no, it's $2.1 trillion, but even though it's not being collected from taxes, we're creating a new deficit. It won't create inflation, of course not. Why would it do that? And then what happened? Inflation is now at unprecedented levels. As I said before, people cannot afford food, people are struggling, and what is happening most through this entire inflationary period? The wealthiest 1% are enjoying asset inflation, while all of us are struggling to make ends meet, to really just get basic necessities going. Food is more expensive than ever, gas is more expensive than ever, and the 1% just keeps seeing the stock market go up and up with every single time the Fed wants to cut rates more and more. And that's one issue where Dems and Republicans have identical views on the Fed. Both of them were silent when they printed trillions of dollars. Both of them are complaining that we're about to have rate hikes. Why? Because it's politically inconvenient. But at the end of the day, both of them are nearly identical on most economic issues. Both Trump and Biden spent trillions of dollars in COVID stimulus. Both Trump and Biden did not criticize the Fed when the Fed was going complete expansionary mode. Both of them encouraged, not only were they not critical of the Fed, they actually encouraged it. They encouraged the Federal Reserve buying bonds of America's largest companies like Google, Apple, and all of these other huge companies. They were subsidizing them when Americans were in a recession. And now, just in 2020, millions and millions of Americans were unemployed. Within 2 years, we're about to get into another recession. And you guys want to vote for them?
We'll go to the Democrats next.
I'm sorry to break it to you, but if it wasn't for the Democratic Party, then we actually wouldn't have a plan at all post-COVID. So I just want to say that first and foremost. So you talk about the wealthy 1%. Well, actually, the Inflation Act's cracked down on wealthy tax cheats, making it so that demand goes down and supply goes up. Anyone who took basic economics knows that the reason why we have inflation right now is because we have an issue with supply, which is mainly caused by the war not only happening in Ukraine, but also the fact that we just had a worldwide pandemic that lasted nearly 2 years. So lowering costs for small businesses is mainly what the Inflation Act is built on. Specifically energy costs lowering or subsidizing that with a 30% tax credit for solar energy being implemented, and that's really where the bulk of most of the plan comes from. It's a lot of tax credits and a lot of subsidies, not for the high corporations like President Trump did in 2016, but instead for the small businesses who are transitioning from fossil fuels to clean energy. We can also talk about the 30% tax credit and cleaner vehicles by the busing industry or by trucking, or trucks, I'm sorry. We can talk about how we cap the price of insulin for those who can't afford it. That indefinitely makes it so that production value, production costs go down. If we're having companies pay for their employees' insurance, well then it would make sense if the insurance is less. It would also make sense where people aren't spending $300 a year on insulin when they can't survive. It just makes sense. It's common sense legislation does. And we can talk about how the cost, the rise in prices equals the rise in costs. And again, that just goes down to cutting inflation. You talk about how we're putting money into the economy, we're putting money in the economy artificially. Well, we use historical precedent here, and FDR did the exact same thing in the Great Depression. And for the most and foremost, I actually think that solved a lot of issues. So yes, I do understand a lot of the issues maybe in the short term, but at the same time, if you look in the long term, we're cutting the deficit down nearly by half within the next 10 years. And that's not because we decided to talk about issues or we decided to berate the other party about issues, but instead we actually put forth an issue that no Libertarian voted for and no Republican voted for. And we did that in a sizable margin, so yeah.
I would say that from my experience, there has never been an instance in history where hundreds of billions of dollars, and in this case, perhaps even trillions of dollars, have been printed into the economy that have reduced inflation. It has been a number of months since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, and yet inflation continues to rise. I think it is a distraction to point out the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a cause of inflation because it was well on the rise before that. And yes, we can attribute COVID as a major factor in why this inflation is happening. And yet, the strongest COVID lockdown enforcements on the economy happened in blue states. With that in mind, I think the Democratic Party was always going to be the party that was most in favor of shutting down the economy under the justification of public safety, of course, but you can't suddenly walk back from that, and I don't think the insulin price caps are a major contribution to inflation when it comes to when average Americans go to the grocery store, when they go at the gas station. These things have been long-lasting problems, and I don't think adding all of these subsidies for green energy are going to be effective. I've read the Congressional Budget Office plan for the Inflation Reduction Act, and if I recall correctly, the plan is to reduce inflation over a span of 10 years, which is far too long for Americans to wait right now. And generally speaking, green energy projects, I don't think can ever, aside from nuclear, equal the output that we get from fossil fuels. So I don't think that this is going to be an efficient plan. I don't think this is going to be an economically sound plan. And generally speaking, we're not seeing inflation going down right now. I don't think we're going to see it be going down because of this act in the next few months. It might go down naturally as economies tend to ebb and flow in such directions, but I think this act is completely ineffective.
Okay, Libertarians, would you like to give a response?
I'd like to start by addressing three gross misunderstandings from my Democrat colleague. First of all, he mentioned supply and demand being obvious. Yes, supply and demand is obvious. It's what every economist loves to talk about. But calling inflation a supply side issue is such, I'll save my words on that, but that's a statement that works in Europe, where they are significantly affected by the Ukraine-Russia war, and you can see that aggregate demand measured by GDP has been significantly below trend for the last, I would say, 1.5 years. Whereas, if you look in the United States, aggregate demand has been so significantly above pace that aggregate demand also measures consumer spending, that corporations are seeing record profits. The reason they're seeing record profits is because people are consuming at incredibly higher rates. People are consuming well above their needs. Demand is far outpacing supply. In fact, just today, the Federal Reserve had a meeting, November 2nd, 2 p.m., and Chairman Powell said that we have a demand side issue right now. Supply side issues have completely been mitigated. And a great way of checking this out is by looking at the New York Fed supply chain stress indicator. I remember this from the top of my head because of how much I'm tired of hearing people say this. The New York Fed supply chain stress indicator shows that just as of September 22, we are now at Feb 2020 levels of supply chain stress. Supply chains are not an issue anymore. This is a misnomer. This myth cannot be kept being propelled that we are dealing with supply chain issues, that we are dealing with supply shock. They're at Feb 2020 levels from now to Feb 2020. Next, let's get into FDR. FDR actually, I'm very happy you reminded me of FDR, since he passed a bill that was extremely similar to the Inflation Reduction Act. In 1933, yes, FDR passed a tax hike on corporations, on the wealthy, just as the Inflation Reduction Act did. What happened? 2 years later, in 1935, America suffered a recession within the Great Depression.
That fixed it.
Right. Democrats?
Just going to go back to what the Republicans were mentioning. Sorry, I could go on hours with that. Healthcare costs specifically, how does that affect people going to grocery stores? I think that's what you said. I might be mishearing, but for those who know, I'm not sure if anyone here has to take insulin, for example, or has to do any of that kind of stuff, but there are a lot of people out there who actually can't go to grocery stores and buy for their entire family for weeks on end because they can't afford it. They have to pay for groceries, they have to pay for insulin instead. So it does affect people on a daily basis. It does affect people who go to grocery stores, and it certainly affects people who have to go and travel to their doctors to get all that stuff. So I'm sorry, but it definitely does. So with the clean energy, how it doesn't boost the economy, it almost certainly does. We're moving to a greener future, and whether you agree with it or not, it's just facts. The entire planet is moving to a more green economy. It's just what we're doing. And with the clean energy subsidies, we're giving tax incentives to boost the economy with clean energy. It boosted with economic growth on a small scale.
Okay.
I am not disputing the potential effects that the insulin price caps may have in the long term. I feel as though when I look at the specifics within the Inflation Reduction Act, it is filled with Democratic pet projects lumped in under the guise of reducing inflation. I think the group of people that you are talking about that may be affected by this, yes, they may benefit from the price cap, but I think that should have been handled in a separate bill. I think the number of people it may reach that would be affected in the way you described would be quite small. And I think the reality for Americans beyond the insulin, those who need insulin, the reality is that inflation is still a major problem for every American household. Generally, I think the simple solution is, in times of economic hardship, I think we should cut taxes. I think we need to balance the budget in a way that we don't run these massive deficits and that we can actually start controlling in federal spending in a way that really allows the economy to reflect a more balanced government funding.
At 60.
All right. The Libertarians, do you have any final words to say on this topic?
There have been 3 times in the last 100 years where a president has raised taxes right before a recession. First, 1929, Herbert Hoover raised taxes right before the Great Depression. Second, 1933, FDR raised taxes and caused a recession within a depression. How someone managed to do that, I have no clue. And the third time that has happened was 2022 when the Biden administration passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Passing any sort of tax hike right before a recession is absurd. If you talk about these wealthy people that you guys criticize so much, put yourselves in their shoes. If you had your taxes raised on you as you were entering a recession, as your costs are about to rise, what are you going to do? Are you going to cut back your own profits? Or are you going to cut workers? Are you going to cut worker wages? Or are you going to unemploy workers? When you raise taxes on the wealthy right before a recession, that is asking for disaster. And this is exactly what FDR did, and this is exactly what Hoover did, and the Biden administration is making the exact same mistake. Why? Political points. That's all that matters. They're making the exact mistake.
At 60.
All right. Democrats, final word on the topic?
Yeah, just one really quick thing. The issue of cutting taxes, especially like broadly, is that when you cut taxes, you're essentially reducing government revenues. That's the most basic thing that happens. And with a time like this, we just can't be doing that because if we're cutting government revenues, we can't be investing in anything, and we can't do that when we have a recession. We can't do that at any time, I believe. Not only that, but we're also creating the possibility of a budget deficit, as you like to allude to earlier. So, all around, cutting taxes at the moment, especially for people who make more than enough money, just isn't feasible.
Right. And then the College Republicans, you have the final word on the topic.
Generally speaking, I think I do strongly agree with the points that libertarians made on inflation. We do need to tackle the issue of high government spending. It simply is out of control right now where the national debt is increasing so much. I remember previously to the 2016 election, the national debt was hovering somewhere around $20 trillion, and now it's gone up another 10 trillion. In the long term, we will have to pay the consequences of these high cost projects that the federal government loves to do every year. And the cost, I think, in the future, possibly even in the near future, will be hyperinflation because we are simply injecting so much money into the economy. And I do not think businesses, I do not think average Americans, I do not think the structure that we have in place right now is going to be ready to handle that. So I'm very worried about the potential effects that the so-called Inflation Reduction Act may have in the future. I think it's counterintuitive. And I do think that the pieces in it should have been handled by separate bills.
Finish your point.
Generally, like if you actually read through the bill, it is all infrastructure projects, and I don't think new money in the economy is going to reduce inflation. I think it's going to have the opposite effect.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to move to our final topic now, which is international relations. We will start with the Democrats and then go on to the Republicans. And so this question is, since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the U.S. has sent more than $16.2 billion to aid Ukraine. Is it in the best interest of the United States to continue to support Ukraine against Russian advances? College Democrats?
Without a question of a doubt. Ukraine is currently being invaded by a psychotic maniac who can be related to Adolf Hitler, who can be related to anyone in history, even Stalin, Mussolini, the name, the list goes on. Bottom line is that Putin is invading a sovereign state on the basis of God knows what. I have no idea why. I don't want to know why. There's historical precedents there, but I think that's quite, garbage. The point is that as the United States of America, we have a very important role in the United Nations, in the world. We have a very strategic role as well. If we let a country invade another country on pretenses that quite don't make any sense, and they continue to break international law, they continue to break human rights, they continue to violate millions of people, then what are we as a country if we don't step in? I think this is an opportunity not only for the United States to show true leadership, but to really defend democracy. And, it's kind of scary to say this, but even the former president himself admitted that this is a horrible act of not only just cruelty on behalf of Putin, which, again, for some reason we agree with, but the point is that if we don't act, if we don't continue to send aid, then what's going to happen? What's going to happen when Russia takes Ukraine? Does that mean that China will then take Taiwan? It opens the door for so many things that we as a country, we as a world cannot let happen. And I feel like if we continue to have a discussion where one party or a group of people say that it's dangerous to give money to a state that's under attack because we can't afford it, well, guess what? If we are attacked, if any of our neighbors are attacked, if anyone in else in Europe is attacked, who's our main trade partner, then what are we going to do? Are we going to let them be taken over? What if we were in that situation? I think it's a question of not only morality, but I think it's a question of ethics and strategy. If we decide to let this happen, which I'm very grateful that not only the president, but also most of the country agrees, if we don't let this war subside and end with our help, then we're opening the door to many, many horrible things in the future.
All right, college Republicans.
Well, I hate to sound like a broken record, but on this I completely agree with the college Democrats, and that's about the only friendly thing I'll say to the college Democrats about this. See, not only should we be defending Ukraine and defending democracy in the world, but we should be acting on behalf of democracy. Because whenever we don't, that just leaves authoritarians to believe, well, we're free to intervene on our own behalf. This will lead to Russia deciding, all right, Ukraine's right for the taking, China saying Taiwan's right for the taking, and this goes back across history. See, there's this strain of thought which used to be confined to the left wing, which likes Noam Chomsky more than it does child porn, and that says every problem that democracy faces, every problem America faces on the world stage is somehow, some way, America's fault from, 20 to 100 years ago. And this whole line of thought has led to a spirit of American dissociation from world events, that it used to be the socialist left saying, we shouldn't be opposing the Soviets in their expansion against God knows how many countries, because it's really our fault, and we should have rapprochement, détente, new Ostpolitik, whatever European words you want to say in order to defend the concept of being friends with communists. And after that, it led to this spirit of, well, what do we care? What do we care what goes on in the world when it's not at our doorstep? And so this became adopted, unfortunately, by a strain of the populist right, which it likes to think it's more popular than it really is. The vast majority of Americans, including the vast majority of Republicans, support Ukraine against Russia, as it rightly should. And even if it were our fault, somehow, that Russia invaded Ukraine, that's all the more reason that we need to defend Ukraine against Russia, because after all, aren't we responsible for their present predicament? Not to say I believe that, it's all Putin's maniacal ambitions that led to the invasion of Russia. Thank you.
Libertarians?
You know, honestly, it's so telling that both the parties that are being represented here both agreed with interventionist policies, which are costing Americans more money, and not only are they costing Americans money, but they might be actually exacerbating the war in Ukraine right now. So let's look over some of the facts about American intervention that have existed. Let's look at the war on terror, a 21-year and still going war that has been fought across 80 different countries and has cost $8 trillion. That's 12 zeros, people. 7,000 U.S. soldiers have been killed, 50,000 injured, and 30,000 have succumbed to suicide because of this war. So in Iraq, approximately 22% of people have a family member who died during the war on terror. So that's about 1/5 or 1/4 of every person in Iraq. So that would be, if I pick you, oh, you lost a family member. You lost a family member. I'm so sorry to tell you this. Well, here's another interesting fact that you might enjoy. Overall, the total death amount is about 900,000 people in the war on terror. That's about 370,000 civilians, by the way, may I add. And that number doesn't include the 37 million who have been displaced because of the war. So let's look at that for a second. That's 8 million of those 27 million, or 37 million, excuse me. 8 million are refugees that have gone to Europe. And what do you think is a movement that's been starting in Europe because of it? You've had right-wing populism growing now in Europe, not only in Europe, but in America. And what we've seen is the results of this. Donald Trump got elected president. The UK decided to leave the EU. This is all a result of populist, of wars that didn't have to happen. The neocons and the people who are working for interventionism are their own worst enemies in this case. Not only that, but if we look at the spending, what we're doing essentially is printing money in order to help the war effort. So how much money are we printing, maybe ask? Well, we said earlier, I think it was something like 16 billion rather, something like that. And 13 billion of that is going just directly to military. The other, about 4.5 billion is going to financial, and another 2 billion are going to humanitarian. So that's fantastic. And let's talk about some other things that could happen. So of course, we have the obvious, what has already happened with the war on terror. And then while we were fighting, we thought that Russia would be distracted long enough with what's going on in the Middle East, that we could topple over in a coup in 2014, a government that was elected in Ukraine, and instead replace them with what were at the time neo-Nazis. And what we replaced them with were people who then had a war with Ukraine, and that's where the Russo-Ukrainian war started. And that's when they first lost Crimea, and the war is still continuing on to this day in a different form now. So is it really in our best interest? I have to ask you.
Democrats, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. Three things. Someone said something about socialism. The most famous socialist in the entire country, Bernie Sanders, actually, he actually supports Ukraine and said in its regards. So I don't know what that whole thing was about. The last time we did intervene in something, World War II happened. So I mean, the last time Hitler invaded a country, and then whatever, World War II occurred. So in the war on terror, it wasn't a state. It wasn't a sovereign state with a democratic government elected. It's not. It never has been. And a question I'd like to pose to libertarians is, what do we do then? Do we just pull out of Ukraine, stop funding entirely, and then just let the entire nation get attacked? And if so, then what do we do in the future? What happens when Russia takes Ukraine? Are they going to move forward? Do we know the answer to that question? Because it sounds like you guys do, since you think pulling out of Ukraine would end a lot of issues abroad.
Right. Republicans, would you like your response?
Sure. Classic libertarians creating a, bringing up a whole bunch of statistics and things and facts about their pet peeves and then not actually answering the question at the end. In any event, when I talk about socialism, I'm talking about the rapprochement of the Soviet policy advocated by socialists in America and internationally that eventually became adopted by the Democratic Party and other left-wing groups, which led to this whole spirit of, well, you know, it's still our fault. Everything we do comes back to bite us in the ass somehow, so we just shouldn't do anything. America's a force for bad. And this leads to humanitarian crises in Russia, in Ukraine, in China, in Taiwan, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and so forth. That have I spent my time? Oh, never mind. In any event, it remains our humanitarian mission as the most powerful country in the world, no matter the cost, to advance humanitarian causes worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you. And Libertarians, I'll give you the final word on this topic.
Okay, so there's a lot to go over there. We're the only ones alone. We're alone here. We're lone warriors. So first of all, with World War II, it was actually because of the Treaty of Versailles, which was exacerbated by the continuation of the war due to the American intervention, which would have ended in Europe already and probably would have maintained the monarchy. And honestly, probably would have been an actual problem, and maybe the mustache guy would have gone in, but who knows. Next up, it's interesting that we hear the sort of the ends justify the means argument here, because to be honest, that seems a little bit interesting. In what other case can the ends justify the means, guys? So wait, if we know that statistically, let's say this person might cause a crime, they might kill somebody, should we then prevent that person from being born, or should we prevent that person from having a job purely because they might do something? Is it a thought crime to think otherwise? And then finally, what I want to end on is that really the military-industrial complex, which is something that both parties obviously support because neither have cut funding for anything and have put more money into the hands of the military. And at the end of the day, the wars end now.
We will now open it up for questions from the audience. Does anybody have a question? I'll go over there first.
Yeah, the Democratic Party. You mentioned something about taxes. Cutting taxes means lowering revenue. What about bonds? So the government can use bonds as well. So what do you have to say about that?
Horrible at economics. So just point out to you right now, I cannot answer that question to you. I'm sure that maybe you could. Maybe you could educate us all on that. I have no idea how it works. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I had a 3 on my macro exam. That's the highest score I can get, okay? So, you know, if you'd like to maybe explain to us maybe your idea, I don't know if we're allowed to do that, but like...
May I answer it?
I mean...
Yeah, we'll go to the next group.
Yeah.
So let the Libertarians go, and then the Republicans ask, and then we'll go to the next question.
So, when you're talking about government bonds, that's called government deficit spending, and that is when the government spends money without raising taxes. And some examples of that were the American Rescue Plan, which ended up causing a lot of inflation. Another example of that would be Build Back Better, if it passed, thankfully it didn't. Deficit spending is really the reason why we are in the place we are today. Bonds is the Federal Reserve printing money and saying future taxpayers deal with this. And for now, we're going to create inflation and not let the current taxpayers deal with it. And that is how we get debt, and that is also why our government debt is at $30 trillion, and with interest rates rising, we are now, actually just as of today's new rate hike, we are now paying more money on interest on the debt than we are on the military. If people want to talk about how much we spend on the military, we now spend more on interest payments every year because of how much we spend every year. Spending through bonds instead of raising taxes or instead of cutting spending. We now spend more on interest payments on the debt. That's how much the Democrats and Republicans have spent just in the last 20 years. We now spend more on interest payments every year than we do on the military. That's the issue with bonds.
Republicans have anything to say on the topic? None? Okay, we'll go to a question over there. Yep.
Yeah. College libertarians have mentioned a couple times the Federal Reserve and its effect on the U.S. economy. Congress has debated for many years the Federal Reserve Transparency Act, also known as Audit the Fed. Secretary of the Treasury, former Fed Chair Janet Yellen, has criticized that heavily, yet recently stated that under Jerome Powell, the Fed may be pushing us deeper into an avoidable recession. So I'm just curious what any of the group's thoughts are on auditing the Fed or it being under the
I would love to audit the Fed. It really wouldn't do a whole lot besides expose a lot of corruption. In 2020, I think 2 or 3 Fed officials were fired for trading stocks while the Fed was buying mortgage-backed securities and buying other securities. Really, that's insider trading. That's as insider trading as it gets. And the only reason Janet Yellen pushed back was she used to be Fed chairman. A little bit of a bias there. Auditing the Fed would be great, but it would not solve even one of our economic problems. That's good for ethical reasons, for knowing what our government's doing. I think that's a bare minimum we can ask as citizens, to know what our government is doing. The fact that we haven't been able to audit the Fed is kind of sad, but it really wouldn't solve even one economic problem. The Fed is still the Fed. The Fed still has a monopoly on issuing currency, and that doesn't change anything.
Republicans or Democrats, either of you have anything to add? Looks like Republicans are grabbing the mic first. Okay.
I would quickly like to say that my personal stance is I would abolish the Federal Reserve. Not only that, I see it as an unconstitutional institution, that it is a essentially private bank that simply has the name federal slapped on it. I believe that is the U.S. Treasury's job to print new currency, not the Federal Reserve's. I think the damage it has done on the economy in the long term is utterly disastrous. And I think we should start looking at alternatives to its existence. And that is my personal stance. I do not imagine many other Republicans agree, aside from maybe Rand Paul or Ron Paul, similar fiscal conservatives.
And Bernie Sanders apparently does.
Democrats, do you have anything you want to add to this? No? Okay.
We're going to abstain from that, yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. We had a question over here.
I had a question for the Libertarians. How under a Libertarian platform would you propose the state enforces like the evict not kill thing?
So when I bring up evictionism as opposed to abortion, what I really mean is something that we should aim for. Obviously it would be our ethical preference, but at the end of the day, there's not really much that our government can do besides just say that we back it. But the problem is obviously that the government has a lot of problems in terms of telling people what to do, and we don't like any of those. So I would say in the case of evictionism, it's definitely something we want to spread. If we can spread the idea and it manages to get enough traction where people say, wait a minute, that makes more sense than doing one or the other, it seems to me like having a third option, a compromise for Americans to at least consider, is much better than being stuck under this pro-choice or pro-life division that has sent our country into a lot of problems, internally. So I definitely think this is something we need to spread further before we implement necessarily.
So I guess my clarifying question then is for evict, not kill. Are you then forcing the women to give birth and then the government is going to take care of it, or what happens? Like, how do you get this baby out where you're evicting?
So it would really be, I'll address 2 parts of that. Enforced in the sense of just as any other property rights are, you cannot kill, if you kill someone, you go to jail. To the professor's clarification, how this would work is the mother would evict the baby in a sense of get the baby out of their body, and then the baby is left. Meaning it can be taken under the shelter of the hospital, it can be given to a shelter. If the baby dies, then it dies. It wasn't a murder. The baby died. And the thing is, what we didn't get to talk about it earlier, is technology is rapidly improving. And with that, soon enough, we're actually really close to this, but soon enough, the baby will be able to live on its own and sustain as incubators are getting better, as NICU centers are improving. So although this isn't the state we're at today, this is a state that we can, with pretty good reason, assume that the markets will find a way to keep babies thriving. But really, the point is the ethical part of this, that there's no way to draw a line saying you can abort here and you can abort here at this line, because there's no way that it's really proven when the baby is a baby and when it isn't. This is a debate that's been going on for decades with no conclusion. This is saying that you cannot kill a baby, but you also cannot restrict a person's choice. Your body, your choice. You own yourself. You can't really restrict that. And the point is that this is the ethical solution. Even though the result may not be too different than another pro-choice person, in that babies would still be dying, but the ethics is what's important here. It's what's right.
And then just to add one more thing to that is, if we did see this implemented, what you would notice is first of all, and this would be more of a sort of consequential thing, but because there would be a market for it, you would see these improvements faster than you would like in our current state of things. So again, you have to consider that maybe when there's an actual demand for something, innovation will come quicker. So that's another thing I just want to point out.
Okay, we'll go to the Democrats for their response.
Yeah, so a couple things. Clearly, you guys mentioned earlier that the baby inside the womb is the same baby outside the womb. That doesn't make any sense. Within the first 3 weeks, it's a clump of cells, let's be honest. I just have a few little points I want to mention before I give it to the only actual girl on the entire panel. Before that, though, I do want to say that, well, first of all, that's a lot of money we're talking about for keeping up to the babies going to the hospitals. It's a lot of money to spend. But also, if a woman gets an abortion, and then with your logic, then why don't they claim life insurance on the baby? And if an illegal immigrant decides to have a baby, they can't be deported because they have a United States citizen inside them. So with your logic, I have no idea how any of that makes sense. Sorry, but I'm going to give it to the only girl in the panel, please.
Yeah, I would just like to raise a few feasibility concerns because I feel like any child or baby left alone up until the age of like 3 or 4 is probably going to die no matter what you do with it. It's also really just not feasible, and you're spending a lot of government money on public. Really, because I think most babies are born in public hospitals, and if you have to abort them in public facilities like public healthcare, government-funded healthcare, and then just evict them and leave them in incubators, that's going to cost a lot of money. I think we can daydream here about ethics all we want, but the answer's clear. Also, by legalizing abortion and just letting that happen, you're saving a lot of money on welfare. People are not going to be filing for welfare and Social Security as much because they don't have to take care of children they cannot afford. And yeah, I'd just like to leave it at that.
I'm a little bit confused, if I may just for a few seconds. We folks agree that a mother should have the right to abort the baby. Where we disagree is we're saying that the kid should at least try and be kept alive. I don't see why that's an issue. The main reason anyone should support abortion is because it's a mother's right to do so, and we agree on that. So why do you want to stop even trying to keep the baby alive? I don't see why that's an issue. And just one more thing, and then I'll let you respond if you'd like. The baby being left just doesn't mean we're going to put a baby out on the street. That's not what happened. If you also just leave the baby, which is horrible thing to do. I'm saying, like, if you're a parent, you just leave the baby on the doorstep. There will be private shelters that take this up. And can we not act like the government is the only type of institution providing charity? Most homeless shelters, I think 90% of homeless shelters are private, and a significant amount of child shelters are also private. And I would bet a lot of money that's a majority. Government is not needed for welfare. People can provide without being forced to give money to do so. But my main point is that we agree that a mother should have a right. Why would you not at least want to try and preserve the child? Because the point is that the mother gets the right to abort the baby if they don't want it. That's the important part. Why would you want the baby to be dead? You should want to at least try and save the baby.
So 30-second wrap up, and then we'll go one final question to the audience.
Yeah, so most abortions are taken care of pretty early on, and most babies at this point, they're not even developed, they don't have their organs yet. They just cannot survive on their own. I would be open to trying in a magical fantasy world where that could happen. And also, yeah, I do agree that a lot of shelters where people go to get adopted, a lot of child shelters, homeless shelters are private, but they're also completely overrun with babies that are, alive. No one's going to want to adopt these children. I'm sorry, but that's just the truth.
So final question, I guess we'll go to the timekeeper.
Can we give the final question to someone else? I just wanted to pose a small question on abortion, if I can time it, if you don't mind.
So you want
for 1 minute apiece, yeah.
1 minute apiece.
A quick question, yes. Even coming from a Republican standpoint, I have pulls from a lot of both sides here. As a person who was in foster care, I feel a lot of what the Democrat side is saying. I personally am somewhat more pro-life as a Republican. However, our foster children are treated horribly. I can definitely tell you that from personal experience. Adoption in the U.S. is really, really hard, which is why a lot of people, a lot of celebrities tend to adopt from overseas. Is there any type of policy that any type of subsidized program that any of you can propose possibly to have a compromise for, I guess, like, if we were to have like some type of compromise, like what trimester, what exact day, what exact week, in order to better take care of children who end up in, again, as a result of shortened abortion terms. What do we have any policies that we can implement helping those children move forward, the ones who end up in adoption centers and in foster care?
Who starts?
I'll give a minute and 30 seconds to anyone who wants to start.
Okay, I can take this.
Sure.
All right, first of all, a terrible life is still a life, and so one needs to really come to a crossroads of, is life worth living? That's the ultimate question. And if it's terrible, can suffering be so bad that it's better to have never been born? And that's a decently deep question, which I'll just answer with, yeah, probably. So that being said, you need to really get into the technocratic specifics of how you would improve the lives of these children. And supposing that there were some national abortion ban, how would you make sure that those children which are now born into these terrible situations which the Democrats listed, how would you ameliorate their situation? So Mitt Romney, for instance, developed a family plan that's meant to help support American families through, the libertarians are gonna bust their caps on this,
30 seconds.
through government subsidies, through tax breaks, through government paid maternity leave and so forth. And that hopefully should help encourage the existence of families for these children who would otherwise be, quote unquote, unwanted or aborted to live properly.
So you're proposing some type of
Yes,
law that helps families who essentially helps families in general when they have children.
Yes, supporting Mitt Romney's family plan, yes.
Do you couple that with a national abortion ban? It seemed to be part of your question.
Well, that's part of the thing, that as of right now, most American babies are aborted rather than sent out for adoption. So assuming that there is an abortion ban, one would have to couple that with support for those babies which are going to be born. Otherwise, it's exactly as Democratic propagandists would say, that it's some evil desire to control women's bodies.
All right, libertarians, then we'll go to Democrats.
We've seen throughout history that as taxes are cut, charity increases. There's more charity. When the government already forces you to give charity in the form of taxation, people kind of lose that incentive to really do good for each other, since you're already contributing a significant portion of your income that's supposed to be helping other people. So having a smaller government that's doing less useless, wasteful things would allow people to put more of their incomes towards better charities, better private charities, better homeless shelters, etc.
Democrats?
I feel like the policy solution lies in what you were talking about before with foster care. I think the foster care system is severely broken, and that's what needs to be fixed. I'd also like to point out that women already are evicting their babies after carrying out a pregnancy they never wanted to carry out, and these children that are being evicted are ending up in the foster care system, which is really detrimental to their mental, emotional, and physical health. So I think the reform that we need lies in the fact that the foster care system is broken. We need better child shelters, we need better foster care, and we need to reform the system that children are suffering under.
All right, we'll go with one final audience question. Green shirt's been trying for a while, so we'll go green shirt and then
Howdy. So it's been a long, long debate, a very tough, complicated, and controversial topic. So I'm going to ask a funny one because I'm bored. This is a very controversial topic in Binghamton. A lot of students debate about this. I personally am willing to kill someone over this. So my question is it air sip or waterfall?
Waterfall.
I like it.
It's waterfall.
It's working.
I'm
Waterfall.
Can you explain to the barbarian why it's waterfall?
Because you say, hey bro, can I waterfall?
Can I get an air step?
And you know, you put the water bottle up here, and the water comes out, and it falls into your mouth, so you know it's the water.
fall. Sit. Make the motion of, I'm sorry for talking about like this, but make the motion of sitting right now. When you air sit, you go.
Can I tell you one reason why it's called air sip and not waterfall?
Okay.
Because you can waterfall something while still putting your mouth on the cup. The point is that you're not putting your mouth on the cup, and that's why you ask for an air sip. Your mouth is not touching the cup. If it was a waterfall,
He's wrong! You're all wrong, and I'm right! And that is the lesson we've learned today.
Alright, so I would like to thank you all and our panelists for coming. Let's give our panelists one final round of applause for doing such a great job. And just because the debate is over does not mean political conversation has to be over. You can hang out, check out the different clubs that are tabling, talk to our panelists, as well as continue the discussions with your friends, and don't forget to show up to vote next week. Thank you all for coming.